Hey guys, it's me, Wolf, and today we're doing something a little different again. Recently I watched a live stream on OniGiri's YouTube channel. She normally does cooking streams, but has recently started to do some woodworking content. At this point in time she's obviously still a beginner, but I simply love to watch her content and look at the progress she's making from build to build. And while I don't have the confidence to call myself a professional, I still think that I have some tips and tricks that can be used by any beginner woodworker. So my plan here is to go through the video and give some small comments and explanations on the side. And I want to be clear here once again that I mean no harm to her or how she does things. I simply thought this would be a good opportunity to point out some common woodworking mistakes. And something else that is important to mention is that she does this live in front of about 4,000 people that constantly type in her chat, do this, do that, no you did that wrong, and this must be so stressful. I'm just saying that it's easy to sit comfortably at home and criticize every little action, kinda like I'm doing here while doing nothing yourself, but I hope this video doesn't give you that vibe. But now I've explained enough of the technicalities and let's hop into the build. Giri is following the building plans for a DIY kids toy rack from Fix This Build That, which at first seems to be pretty simple.
The only problem is it requires pocket holes. Does anyone know what a pocket hole is?
First off, I don't think that pocket holes belong in a DIY project, because most of people who do DIY stuff don't necessarily have the special tools available. And you could probably fill a whole video talking about pocket holes only, but let's get back to this topic a little later and start with safety gear.
Glasses on, gloves
Safety
on,
glove.
some thin ass slippers and a sock.
Glasses for eye protection are great and a must-have, and hearing protection would be a really nice addition. The safety slippers could be replaced by safety shoes, but I am honestly not that much better. The only thing I won't agree on though are the gloves. This is a very common safety hazard and most people get this wrong. It is best to avoid wearing gloves because they tend to pull you into the blade rather than protect you from it. So gloves, long hair and loose clothing should be avoided on every tool or machinery that has exposed rotating parts. Here's a little demonstration on what happens on the drill press. Then Giri makes the first cut perpendicular to the wood grain, and viewers give her some commonly used woodworking advice.
Setting the edges means 45 degrees to wrap. I don't know what that means. Wrap the sandpaper around something. Oh, like a piece of wood or something. Smart.
Yes, wrapping sandpaper around a flat piece of wood is helpful for sanding the edges and flat surfaces. If you are not planning on achieving a perfectly glass smooth finish and maintain some of the natural wood charm, I would recommend doing one final round of sanding by hand though. Something to look out for when sanding the edges is that you are not going to achieve a perfect transition between two pieces of wood. So if that's important for your project, try to take off as little as possible or just don't do it at all.
2.5. Okay. And maybe just one more. 2.25.
A small measuring mistake here. If you're using a tape measure like this, keep in mind that the part in the front creates a triangle and you're measuring the hypotenuse. This can be avoided by either adding up the two values or holding the tape measure on its side. I myself, for example, am not that big of a fan of tape measures because of this moving part in the front. It is made like this so that the tape measure can be used to measure by pushing the tape against something or by letting it hang onto something and not change the outcome by the thickness of this part. So it makes sense why it is built like this, but on most of the tape measures I've used, this part is way too loose. So if you are not measuring a really long piece, I would suggest using a metal ruler or maybe even one of these foldable wooden ones, but you gotta keep in mind there's the same problem with this triangle thingy, and just hold it on the side.
Maybe a little bit more room?
I really like here that before cutting she tries out if there's enough room for the saw, and right now the board is still broad enough to make the lengthwise cut, but after this cut it is pretty narrow and she has to get a little creative.
Don't panic. What's a kickback?
Kickback can happen if the blade catches onto something hard, like a branch in the wood or worse a nail, or if the wood closes in on the back side of the blade. This causes the blade to suddenly jump up. I don't have a handheld circular saw to demonstrate it, but in this case I think kickback isn't that dangerous for yourself, because in order for the blade to hit your face you would have to turn the whole saw around. In this case the workpiece is going to take most of the damage if the saw jumps out of the cut. If you're using a chainsaw on the other hand, kickback is very dangerous, because there's no protection on the top of the blade.
Okay, so now the challenge is cutting it again, but the wood is now narrower. So I don't really know how to cut it without it interfering. Don't make the half cuts, they won't line up. Damn it.
That's true, starting a cut from each side of the board and then perfectly coming together in the middle probably doesn't leave a smooth edge. And something else you always gotta keep in mind is where you've started to cut, because you're going to lose the blade thickness of the material while cutting. If you're planning to use the left side, cut on the right side of the line. If you're planning to use the right side, cut on the left side. It is pretty uncommon to cut in the middle of the line, but if you want to do that, you have to add or subtract half of the thickness of the blade to your measurement, depending on which side you're planning to use. In the next clip she's getting one useful comment from a viewer to use the clamps in a better way, and then she gets bombarded with clamp it to the corner comments.
How do I clamp it so that I can do one full cut? I don't get it. You know, the clamps are a lot less in the way if you use them the other way around. Ooh! Ooh! Clamp it to the corner? You told me to clamp it on the corner. How do you want me to clamp it? I legit don't, I can't visualize how you want me to clamp the corner. I don't know anymore. Piece of wood clamped on top as a guide so the line is easier. I don't quite know what that means, but we'll figure it out.
Okay, good tip there again. Using a piece of wood as a fence to slide the saw against works really well. You just gotta make sure that the piece of wood is really straight and nice and parallel to the cut. The more professional handheld saws come with a rail, but honestly this comment doesn't really help on that particular problem. It's a good tip though. I think what some of the comments meant with clamp it to the corner is either this or either this, and in this case you could probably make one full cut. Another option in this case would be to clamp it onto the table like this, then make the cut for 3/4 of the length. Then turn the board around and place the blade inside the cut from before and finish it all the way. Like this you're technically making one full cut, just divided in 2 steps, and there's no way to misalign the cuts in the center. At that moment though, Giri listened to some of the sadistic comments from her viewers and continued to make this cut with a handsaw. And I might wanna add that she's living in Japan right now, so that's why she's probably using a Japanese saw.
Wait, do you push or pull on a Japanese saw? Pull. Okay. Wait, really? Pull? Directly up and down, not diagonal.
Whee! This clip gives me anxiety because of how wobbly this table is. I can almost feel it myself, how annoying it must be to cut on there. A sturdy workbench helps a lot with cutting. The advice on not holding the saw diagonally is straight up bad. Sorry I have to say it like that. Her sawing technique might not be the best, but the angle of the blade was correct. She's using a Japanese Ryoba. This is a great saw for this application because without a handle or a blade stabilizer on the top you can technically cut infinitely long. But this saw takes quite a bit of practice to cut straight, because it's long and flexible. Some advice I can give you is to start the cut with the small teeth and trying to make the first cut as perfectly straight as possible. If you're cutting with or along the grain, you can then switch to the larger teeth, or if you're cutting across the grain, I would stay on the finer teeth. As already mentioned, this is a pulling saw, which means it cuts on the pulling stroke, so the pushing stroke should be as light as possible. Now if you were to push and pull this like a European saw, it is still going to cut, but try to really think about when to use force and when to relax. It saves a lot of elbow grease and prevents the blade from bending. Another tiny tip, try to listen while you're cutting. You can hear if your blade is running nice and smooth. And if you are close to finishing the cut, go slower to prevent tear out. Her blade gets stuck on one point and one of the viewers gives her the tip to use a wedge on the beginning of the cut. That's a pretty good tip again, just make sure not to push it in too far while cutting along the grain or the wood might split.
We need to attach these two like so, like we're making a cross, yeah? But we have to drill a hole, like a pocket hole. I don't have a pocket hole drill. Can we make one using a drill bit? Yes or no?
Now the time has come to talk about pocket holes. This segment is going to be a bit dry and theoretical. First of all, my answer to Giri's question to whether or not it is possible to drill a pocket hole without the proper drill bit is probably not. And I gotta out myself here a little by saying I have actually never used pocket holes before. they always seemed too complicated for me, but nonetheless I would still like to share the information I have researched. Most of the pocket hole drill sets come with a specific drill bit that has an adjustable stop collar and a thinner drill at the front to start the screw. Most of the time these sets also come with the jig and the appropriate screws. And to fully understand how pocket holes work, let's start with some screw basics. This is a regular wood screw. It is threaded all the way and is mostly used to attach another object to a piece of wood. Here the thread pulls the loose part against the wood. This screw here is quite similar, but it has no threads on the upper part. These screws are used to pull two pieces of wood against one another. The smooth shank should be able to rotate freely on the upper piece, while the threads are pulling themselves into the lower piece. There are lots of other types of screws with different head shapes, head sizes, lengths, coatings, and all of them are made for special applications, but these are the basics to understand how a pocket hole screw functions. As I've said before, I've never used pocket holes before, so this is the only screw that I own that comes close to a pocket hole screw. All pocket screws should have a flat head on the underside, a smooth shank and a thread that can sometimes be self-cutting. On this screw the shank and the threads have the same width, which doesn't make it impossible to use as a pocket hole screw, but it adds an extra step when pre-drilling. But let's just say we have all the required things, we have the jig, we have the screws and the right drill bit. What are the things to look out for when making pocket holes? First of all, is the angle of the jig set according to the board thickness. Then is the stop collar on the drill bit also adjusted to the board thickness. And then when screwing, is the shank able to rotate freely? Is the thread only in the other piece of wood? Is the screw long enough to make a stable connection? And something a little bit more obvious, but is the screw too long and piercing through on the other side? And on this particular build you have to think about the hole placement. If you are coming in from the opposite sides, are the screws in the way of each other in the middle? Then something else to look out for. Is the self-cutting screw able to cut the second piece of wood without splitting it? Or do you have to pre-drill it? If so, what size should I pre-drill? So I need to pull out the table on what size to pre-drill according to the wood hardness. And only one last thing, I promise I'll stop after that. Which direction is the grain facing on both pieces? This mostly comes down to the stability of the final product, but it's important to think about. Like in Giri's case here, the screw is digging into the edge or side grain. That's good. If the screw was to dig into the end grain, it would be less stable. I like to think of the fibers in wood grain like a bag of spaghetti. Just imagine where a screw can hold on to better. Like this or like this. Despite not knowing how pocket holes work, she still carries on courageously and attempted it with a normal drill bit.
Oh, it's going, it's going, it's going! Okay, I'm gonna back out now.
Small comment here, when pulling the drill out, the direction it rotates in doesn't make a difference anymore. It only affects drilling in and screwing. But then before she could screw in the first screw, some viewers had the amazing idea to use wood glue instead. Wow, that's going to be a really fun rest of the stream, waiting 24 hours until it dries. But luckily she stops shortly after and continues with the screws.
Okay. Okay. That was way more glue than anticipated.
Everyone should actually be extremely impressed if you successfully make pocket holes without a dedicated jig for it.
Truer words have never been spoken.
You know, she's looking a little jank. She's definitely not pretty, but she's in there. You know what? We're gonna press on exactly like this. We're gonna continue. It's perfect. Well, perfect is a strong word, but yes. Well.
The final crosses are not perfect, but I gotta give some credit to Giri here that she still attempted to do it. For a build like that you could have used a simple cross slab joint for example, but that would require a chisel. Maybe even better, simply screw the boards on top of each other and call it a stylistic choice. The next part of the build are these cross stabilizers, and there are many options on how to measure 45 degrees.
I need to see clearly. I'm taking my glasses off. I don't get it. Place pieces perpendicular, then mark the opposite line. From 2.5 to 2.5 is 45, right? Hold on.
The paper method guy had it better. Get A4 paper, fold one edge to another, and there you have a 45-degree angle cease.
Like this.
Giri starts off with a spirit level, which would technically be possible by holding the board perpendicular to the table, but it's definitely not the simplest option. The paper method would maybe work, but it isn't the best choice. The hold a piece of wood perpendicular method would work too, but only if the boards have the exact same width. The best option in my opinion would be to use a simple angle measurement tool, but not everybody has one of these, and I think that Giri's method of measuring the width, then measuring the same length along the board and connecting it diagonally is the next best option.
What? Why didn't you just tell her to use the X and draw a line against it to... Oh. Wait.
Yes, if you've already built the cross, then it is possible to use it as a template. But if the cross isn't perfect, you gotta remember on which side you've measured it, because you basically made a custom piece that only fits into this exact section. And just let it go through your head real quick on how you would measure this. I would mark the 12 inches in this case on the board, then slide it in so that the edges align with the lines, and at the end you still have to adjust it so that the plank is parallel to the ground. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it again, you could also ditch the measurement of the 12 inches and place it any height you want really, just make sure that it is parallel to the ground. And I had to include this little clip because it's just funny and relatable.
Did I measure it crooked? Is it supposed to be like this? Ah! You should cut 45-degree angles so you'll be missing some wood. I was gonna cut it afterwards.
This is absolutely correct, but in my personal experience this is not something that is logical to a beginner woodworker. I think you have to really think about it and maybe even see an example in front of you, and then it clicks in your brain. I have a little example here so that we can look at it side to side. Giri first cuts the board into the 12 inches and then cuts off the 45 degrees. That means you're losing this little piece with every cut. The other method looks like this. You're still going to lose this first piece here, but save some material on the following cuts. But keep in mind that this method only works for 45-degree angles. And something else to keep in mind here is that you can't measure them out all at once, because you're still going to lose the blade thickness in material while cutting. Now we are getting to the final steps of the build. The instructions say to add these small pieces of wood to later glue the connecting pieces on there. Obviously the viewers pressure Giri again to use wood glue, which, yeah, it works, but nobody wants to wait a whole day until it has dried. And then Giri would have come up with a viable solution by simply attempting to nail these pieces on there, but she still has to work a little on her hammering technique.
It would have been better off if I just fucking stuck with the glue.
Honestly, this is pretty impressive. I don't think I've ever managed to achieve this with a nail. With screws, yes, but with a nail? Huh. It was worth a try, but sadly Giri doesn't complete the full build. But she gets really close and has some really encouraging words at the end that not only woodworkers but really any beginner should take serious.
Back to wood gluing. You know what? I tried. You live and you learn, eh? You live and you learn. It's not about making mistakes. It's about learning from your mistakes. That is the lesson that I seek to teach you today, okay? Don't be scared to try new things and prove yourselves wrong, okay?
I think with this attitude she's definitely off to a good start, and I am excited to see her growing process. If you're interested too, please check out her channels. I've put them into the video description. I hope you got at least something a little useful out of this video, and I would like to hear your opinions in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.